Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property.
Hello, Lorraine. How are you?
Hello, Stu. I'm good, thank you. How are you, my lovely?
I'm very good, thank you. Very good indeed.
Good.
So today we're going to have another chat about stamp duty, the pressures on the profession again, and the Be Kind campaign and what difference it's potentially made to the industry, and hopefully what difference it might make over the coming weeks. So how are you generally finding things? I know you've been doing a bit of locuming and whatnot.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, off air, we talked about it, didn't we, Stu? I'm wondering, I think we thought it wasn't going to be as, the run up to the 30th of September wasn't going to be as bad as the run up to June. Certainly, I'm finding from the locum end that things are really sort of ramping up and getting busy again. I hate the phrase ramping up. The government uses the phrase ramping up all the time. A non-political comment, but my God, I hate that phrase. I'm sorry I said ramping up. I take that back immediately. But yeah, certainly the workload. I mean, I was in practice in July and certainly it had quieted down post 30th of June. But certainly from what I'm seeing, activity's gone right back up again. There's still a huge, there's all the sort of pressure again. What I've found quite interesting about it, Stu, is that I certainly haven't seen the sort of outpouring on social media from conveyancers that there was. So how are things at PCS Towers?
Very, very similar. It's a bit like deja vu. We seem to be in, almost an identical position that we were in June. It's the same kind of volumes, the same pressures with people looking to conclude before the end of the month. And I do wonder whether, in my own sort of mind, I diluted the 30th of September deadline somewhat, where I think it could be even more important because I think potentially people buying at the lower end of the scale that are taking advantage of this holiday, they don't potentially have access to further funds, if it did overrun. Whereas maybe in June, the person that was buying might have had access to more money potentially. So I just wonder whether it's even more significant that literally, if you don't complete before the 30th of September, it literally could lead to the transaction proving abortive. So I think it might be even more black and white than June.
Oh, that's a really interesting, actually very subtle point, Stu, which I've not seen anybody, I have to say, comment on at all. And of course, the thing about it is, which and I always have these, thoughts in my head about, the obvious one being reservation agreements, and where, you have additional money suddenly sort of floating into a transaction. So if a firm is, running up to the 30th of September, or they're teetering on the brink, they don't quite do it, they tip into the early October, and suddenly a buyer who, as you've just said, can produce the extra money. Well, the conveyancer is then going to have to sort of go through the money laundering hoops in relation to the extra money. We've still got to know where that extra money has miraculously suddenly come from to get them over the line. And I wonder how many people are going to forget that. Yeah.
And like you say, where it come from, did it come from further lending, which may be against their mortgage conditions? So, so it's another nightmare. And I think, from a practical point, maybe a lot of conveyancers out there are, they're more acclimatized to the conditions now. They've been through it once before, so we're used to the pressure maybe a bit more than we were a year ago. And of course, I think another difficulty for firms in general is that, of course, staff have had to take holiday. And firms in general have, a holiday bank that is not depleting quickly enough with the end of the year, on the horizon. So I think trying to couple people being away out the office, there's still the threat of COVID and people contracting it, etc., and having to isolate. And then, of course, having the 30th deadline makes it extremely difficult for law firms to contend with it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, as I say, they're just, that's certainly my experience. But as I say, I just don't think there's the, so there just isn't the visibility where in the media generally, on social media. I'm certainly not seeing that sort of, and therefore we tend to think, oh, well, it must all be all right then. and actually, you know, the pressures are largely the same. I think it's fair to say we probably didn't call that right. I think we both thought that the run up to the 30th September wasn't going to be as bad, or certainly better than it's proving to be. So I don't think we probably called that one right. Stu, what do you think?
No, you're right. We looked at the numbers that we might potentially have in terms of purchase price, matters, and the volumes we might have leading up to September, but I didn't really anticipate the pressures and mirroring back to June, that it would be so significant, but it's definitely proven to be the case.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I wonder then, arcing back to where you started, Stu, because, quite rightly, there has been a lot of talk and a lot of activity around, a generic sort of Be Kind campaign, which clearly is utterly laudable and to be supported. And, one of the big concerns I've had about unsung conveyancers over the last 18 months in particular has been the sort of, the mental pressure as much as anything else, and actually the physical pressure, the loss of work-life balance if you're at home. I mean, there's a whole host of issues there, really. But a lot of organizations, got onto the sort of Be Kind message. And I wonder, it occurred to me that actually now, when we're under a lot of pressure again, this would have been the perfect time for people, be it, agents, lenders, whoever, to sort of demonstrate and put the Be Kind message into practice. And I'm wondering whether, you're all feeling more loved than you did before, Stu. Has the message got through?
Not sure about that myself. I think the Be Kind campaign, is it more of an industry internal kind of campaign insofar as lawyers, liaising with lawyers? I mean, surely, as a general sort of life lesson should lead you into, being nice to each other. But yeah, the Be Kind campaign has to be applauded, and, again, sticking up for lawyers is never something to be sniffed at. But in terms of that campaign from outside the conveyancing industry, certainly it's not something that I've seen in terms of, estate agents and of course clients and expectations. But it always comes back to the same thing again, doesn't it? And it's expectation levels. I think you've got to couple that with, conveyancing knowledge or the lack of it from third parties.
Yeah.
Because this is where it all tends to stem from. And, even now we continually get clients that are told, something's going to happen within a certain amount of time, or that's not a problem, just because this, alteration doesn't have covenant consent, that doesn't matter. Or this, that, and the other. Or the most popular thing in the world is that a client's told you can get an indemnity policy for that. That kind of thing. And this is where the pressures lead in, where there's conflicting information that the clients are told. As a comparable from what emigrates from each lawyer's office.
Well, what I also saw, Stu, you just reminded me actually. So I saw an exchange of a fairly lengthy exchange of tweets, which I only interjected on once, I must say. And a decent, good, decent criminal lawyer who's on Twitter had said something like, is the conveyancing process in England the most broken, miserable, sort of terrible process in the history of the world? And I mean, I did go back with one comment because, how much can you say in 240 characters? Well, not much. And I kept wanting to jump back in because there was just this great pile in. And the point was, it was lawyers. It was, people who perhaps should know a bit. And just thought the entire process was sort of broken, terrible, awful. And then, of course, they come up with these one-line sort of, potential solutions, which, of course, and I know, wouldn't work and are cobblers. And I I resist the urge actually to pile in, because it's not helpful. You know, I can't say anything helpful in the trouble is, if you try to defend constructively, you just end up being accused of being defensive. And I think they're two quite different things, because you and I can absolutely see the problems with the system. We know where the pressure points are. We know what a lot of the problems are. And a lot of the problems aren't all the conveyancers. But again, it's that whole thing. And this was at the weekend. And this was just a pile on about conveyancing and conveyancers by and large lawyers. And I thought,
why do people think the conveyancing process is broken? Is it, it's time?
It's time, but I tell you what triggered the thought, Stu, and this was exactly the point. And this, as I say, criminal lawyer, but then put up another tweet in amongst this great big thread that said something like, well, I've been told that all of these problems can be sorted out for a £495 policy, so why are we where we are? And I thought, well, you've just encapsulated the problem in 2 sentences, mate, because that's the point. Because people are being told there's insurance, and yeah, sure, no, there is, and it absolutely facilitates transactions, and you and I have said it for ages, and we've known it for years. But it is not the panacea for all ills. Sometimes it's not acceptable, and it doesn't put the legal problem right. But if nobody goes on and continues that dialogue and tells people that, then you just end up falling back to, well, we'll insure it.
It's so difficult, isn't it? Because, people often think that indemnity insurance is the answer to everything, but without understanding what the cover's for, and also whether it's actually acceptable to the lender, which it might not be. There's, to me, it's just an education process. And, one thing that I find really confusing and I can never get my head round is and I'm sure all law firms must tell clients at the start what to expect in terms of timescales. And all law firms must do that. So therefore, people know at the onset how long roughly things are going to take. Agents, brokers, everybody knows roughly how long things take. They know it's 3-4 months, blah, 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 blah. And 95% of the time, that's how long it takes. So therefore, if we tell people up front, that's roughly how long it's going to take. How can the conveyancing system be broken?
Did you say, actually, I hope you don't mind me saying this on air, Stu, but did you say you'd actually, you had a complaint about the length of time a transaction took, even though it took less time than you said it was going to take?
Yeah, we've had those before as well. The legal ombudsman found in our favour, which is great. Incidentally, they still recommended we give a token gesture to the client, which we said, well, why would we do that if you found in our favour? But that's another conversation for another day about the legal ombudsman and some of their findings. We tell the client signs the terms and conditions, they've read it. We don't just explain it in the terms and conditions, it's in numerous places within the various reports we send to our client, roughly how long things will take. And I can perfectly understand if we say something's going to take, whatever we say, whether it be 14, 16 weeks, whatever, 18 weeks, and then it goes on for 24, 25 weeks. I can understand the beef that would be behind that. But numerous matters go through quicker.
Yeah.
And we don't say, and no law firm ever says it will take 18 weeks. We say, an average conveyancing transaction will take X amount of time, but it could be longer, it could be shorter, and it does depend on these, external circumstances. And that's what's, really frustrating, I think, when you're in practice, that, you do try and educate people at the onset. You do try and manage expectations. You do try and spell out, this is what might happen. And then people come back and say, but it's a simple transaction.
Yeah.
There's only a buyer, a seller, and another buyer, or whatever the case may be. There's only this, there's only that. If it was that simple, then we wouldn't all be sitting here, having this conversation. We would have exchanged and completed, wouldn't we?
Well, that was another thing.
Like we only get paid, we get paid when it completes. Do we really want a file sitting around for any amount of time? longer than it should be? Obviously not,
Well, that was another thing, actually. You've just reminded me again on this Twitter thread, because somebody had put up a picture of some, book that some bloke wrote, God knows how long ago, that said, well, it's all a great big rip-off because you can do your own conveyancing. So why don't people do their own conveyancing? I can't remember the point at which I did put up one response, but I don't honestly think I bothered with responding to that, and just said, I might actually have said something along the lines of, well, actually, the point of using a conveyancer is client protection. We protect the money, and clients are protected because we're properly insured. And I just dropped that and left it, and didn't engage. And to be fair, that got a few likes for me. But again, it was just, respectable people just peddling this nonsense about, well, it's all a rip-off. Everybody can do it themselves. Well, go on then. Go on. See how many banks you can, see how many banks you'll be able to redeem a mortgage for.
Again, this goes back though to somebody's opinion that's based on the information they hold, and it's really annoying, isn't it, that people will base everything around their mate that managed to do it in 6 weeks.
Yes.
We've got plenty of clients that we're instructed and will complete within the week, but it doesn't mean everyone can do it. There's certain circumstances behind that person, behind what they're doing, the fact they don't need a mortgage, they're a cash buyer. We've acted for them numerous times before, and they're a professional property buyer. There's everything's different. All the circumstances are totally different, aren't they?
I'll tell you what, Stu, you've just reminded me though, just sorry to interject there, but also you've definitely said this before, as an industry, I don't think we're no good at saying when something's gone right. Now, of course, because we're always saddled with the confidentiality, which is perfectly understandable and right and proper, but we never say, I got 8 transactions through in a week. We never say, well, we predicted 16 weeks and actually a whole ton of transactions went through quicker than that last month, because there's no way that we can sort of say it appropriately, but we don't.
I think in general,
we don't beat
though,
our own drum, do we?
That goes back to another point that I think lawyers are very poor at selling themselves.
Yeah.
And one criticism I do have of our industry is we're great at advising clients about things that are wrong or problems, but we're never telling people about all the other problems we've just solved. We've just done this, we've just done that, we've just done this, we've just done that. We kind of, I think as an industry, we're in this bubble, aren't we? And we're continually working on things.
Yeah.
And it's trying to tell people all the time, well, I've just done this, I've just done that. And we had this conversation before we came on air. Our practice, we don't have a standard email, whatever you want to call it, notification that we've actually put somebody's searches in hand. We ask for the maid to say we'll do it, and then we report to clients on when we receive those. But, we don't say we've actually done it. And I think sometimes that's the challenge, isn't it? It's telling clients that, this is what we've done. And, going back to sort of indemnity policies and whatnot, sometimes people don't understand. And maybe that's our failing as well, to a certain degree, that you couldn't buy this property, or you couldn't sell this property. You couldn't go through what you're about to do now, a life-changing experience, if we hadn't have sorted this out for you.
Yeah.
And sometimes I don't think we explain the severity of a situation. I don't think we like saying the bad news, but
I think that's it, isn't it?
I always encourage everyone to say, look, this is a massive problem. Now we can't sit here as an industry and moan when people don't understand what we do if we don't tell them all the time. But we must be telling people that this is a huge problem. You've not got this, you've not done this. It's your bloody fault you didn't get this. I will sort it all out for you. But as a consequence, if I don't do this, your transaction wouldn't go through.
Your transaction,
incidentally, we should be saying, and you never told me this when you got the quote, therefore I'm going to have to add an extra fee for doing it for you as well. We should be doing more of that, shouldn't we?
Well, I've thought that for years, to be honest. I think conveyancers just give it away. They absolutely give it away. I used to teach management courses, and big sections of them were just all about billing and effective billing, and the amount of chargeable time that conveyancers write off on each file is absolutely extraordinary, because it's seen as, it's, you know, we've allowed ourselves a bit of a race to the bottom. It's suddenly seen as lowest common denominator, and I think maybe almost this is almost to sort of finish where we started, really, Stu. But a lot of times I think what we do is sort of devalued, because it's not just a process. And also I think, you know, we are dealing with, for a lot of people anyway, buying, you know, their biggest financial transaction, they're buying a home, there's an enormous amount of emotional investment, and we often want to be seen to be always, you know, telling them the nice things or giving them the good news, and people will shoot the messenger if we're giving them bad news. But the weird thing that I find about that is that's what they're paying us for. If we're saying to a client there's a problem and this is what it's going to take to sort it, they don't want to hear it. They're already thinking about what, you know, what curtains they're going to put in the bedrooms. They don't want to hear it. And the irony is that's what they are paying for. And that's what I find a bit odd. So I suppose maybe to kind of arc back to where we started, Stu, that's why we're still under a lot of pressure in the run up to the 30th of September, because all of those things haven't gone away. And maybe, you know, we're not experiencing the kindness that we perhaps had hoped that we might, from certain sectors of the profession. But maybe people are on holiday now, so they're not sticking out on social media. That's maybe that's where we are with this. All right, Stu. Well, I sensed that we could go on for a long time about this, but in the interests of brevity, we should probably close there. But thanks, because that was really interesting. A lot to say.
No worries. Take care.
Man.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.